Friday at 6:30 right here, so we invite you to come back for that. Also, just in case you haven't caught all of the presentations from Dr. Crutchley, all those are on our YouTube channel, so you can access those, or on our website, so you can catch any of those other ones. One thing I had a question of, and I was asking two questions of Dr. Crutchley. Number one, some of you who are here went with him to Israel about 3 years ago, and you may be wondering, when is he going back? And so I asked him maybe to talk about briefly about some of the trips that he might be having in the next couple years. And there's a cycle on that. And then also, if you were like me last week, if you were here last week, we went through the scripture, and I was trying to follow along, and I was trying to find out what translation he was using. Maybe some of you were trying to figure that out too. So I asked him maybe just to share what translation he's going to be reading from, maybe why he uses that one. And so that might be a way to start. So let's begin with prayer. Lord, we're grateful for the opportunity to continue this journey to the cross, to understand your great love for all of humanity and for us. And we pray, Lord, as we walk through this story, that you might deepen our love for you, that we might have not only understanding with our minds, but understanding with our hearts, to feel and understand better the sacrifice you gave for us, and that you did it on purpose in order to redeem us. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So Dr. Crutchley drives here from Carson Newman every time through Knoxville traffic and back. So that's a big gift. So let's give a big welcome to Dr. Crutchley.
Thanks, Scott. That is not a big hill to climb, driving through traffic to be with you all, and I say that with absolute sincerity. It's been a joy to be here the past 3 Wednesdays, and I hope I haven't gone too high in terms of some scholarship, but I hope I haven't gone too low. I hope I've hit it about right, and given you something to think about in terms of my own journey as well, where I want to go at this particular moment. Journey to the cross is sacred territory, and I sure want to speak to heart and to head as we study this these past few weeks. And Scott, thank you for allowing me to come out here and kind of upset your Monday. My sequence is, I'm at Good Friday tonight already, and you're going to go back to Monday, but thank you for letting me do that and to take those three, Gethsemane, Golgotha, and tonight Golgotha. And I'll just get this out the way quickly so that we don't destroy what I want to lead up to at the conclusion with announcements kind of. I'm going to take a group. I've been to Israel 5 or 6 times, and I'm going to take a group this coming February, end of February, early March, for 13 days to Italy. And I want to call it, what I'm going to do is All Roads Lead to Rome, the last days of Peter and Paul. So it's going to be situated, it's going to be New Testament all the way. I love preaching through Acts, especially that incredible journey on the way to Rome as a prisoner of Jesus, not of Caesar's. In a way, he's a doulos, a bondslave of Christ Jesus. But snake bite and shipwreck on Malta, there's a lot there, and then we get to Rome. But we're going to go, Scott's got a pamphlet if any of you want to see what it is. I'll be glad if you don't mind them just emailing me, D. Crutchley. You can see it on Carson Newman Web. You can dcrutchley at CN. Debbie's got my address, dcrutchley at cn.edu. I'll be glad to send you the brochure and the pamphlet on that, and would love to take you. People have just started signing up. I've got about 20, and I'm probably take 50. So that's the ceiling on that group. And then I want to go to Israel the following 25. All things being equal, the world still being here, and us being here, I'd like to go back to Israel again that spring break of February for about 10 days, which would be 25. I go in spring breaks. That's when I head out. I use the New American Standard Bible Translation, NASB, and it's not as user friendly as the NIV. And am I not on? Am I on? Okay. They're wanting my voice up another level. Thank you, Aaron. Is that better? Can you get me now? Okay. It's the British accent that you're not picking up. If you've been here the last 2 Wednesdays, you should be adjusting to that, huh? Okay. I use the New American Standard Bible because it's wooden. It's not as user-friendly as the NIV, which you might have, but it's closest to the Greek and the Hebrew. And so the ESV is okay, RSV is okay, but I've always used the NASB for about 20 years now. And when I look at the Greek text and I look at the English translation, I find what I want to see. That doesn't mean that I'm a staunch proponent of a translation. We don't defend a translation. We defend that every translation is an interpretation. Now we're getting to some dangerous ground here, but every translation is a interpretation of the original languages. So I love to read. If I'm going to preach on Isaiah 40, I'd use the King James Version because the language, it's about the majesty of God's the theme. How God's majesty is there, and it's tempered with mercy. So use that old, archaic, unique English diction for that text. Or if I want to do a particular psalm about the glory and transcendence and sovereignty of God, I may go and use that King James Version. Some pastors who want me to come into Baptist churches would say you can come on condition you preach out of the King James Version. I don't sweat it. It's not a big deal. That's fine. I'll come and use that. I'll bring along my Greek New Testament as well. But I will, sometimes I will use the NIV. I love to read the Message sometimes. Just go read it for fun. Go see what Eugene Peterson does with the text. He's got some incredible insights, and especially his headings for some of the events that you're reading, his titles before you read the text. Okay, enough said on that one. But I'm going to read from the New American Standard Bible tonight. And before I'm going to read this, and then I'm going to talk about these two potential sites archaeologically, and then I want to dive into the text for the time that we have. And Scott, you just give me 5 minutes again, please. Thank you. Thank you, Debbie, for all your hard work on the slides and organizing with Scott, too. I want to make sure that you get another kudos tonight. Thank you for your hard work. I'm reading from Mark chapter 15, and I'm going to read from verse 22. Mark 15:22, and I'll read through 39. That's 17 verses. Then they brought him to the place Golgotha, which is translated place of a skull. They tried to give him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him and divided up his garments among themselves, casting lots for them to decide what each man should take. It was the third hour when they crucified him. That's 9 o'clock in the morning. The inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." They crucified 2 robbers with him, one on his right and one on his left. And the scriptures were fulfilled, which says, "And he was numbered with transgressors." Those passing by were hurling abuse at him, wagging their heads and saying, "Ha! You are going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days? Save yourself and come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests also, along with the scribes, were mocking him among themselves and saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. Let this Christ, the King of Israel, now come down from the cross so that we may see and believe." Those who were crucified with him were also insulting him. When the 6th hour came, that's 12 o'clock, noon, darkness fell over the whole land until the 9th hour. At the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which is translated, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of the bystanders heard it, they began saying, "Behold, he is calling for Elijah." Someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a reed, and gave him a drink, saying, "Let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down." And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last. The veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. When the centurion who was standing right in front of him saw the way he breathed his last, he said, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." I want to start off with talking about these 2 possible sites for Golgotha. Golgotha in Aramaic, that's an Aramaic term, means skull. The Latin word is Calvaria, which which also means skull. Now, there are two possible places, and when you go to Israel, if some of you have already been in, and you will identify with this, when you go to what we call Gordon's Golgotha, in 1883, a British military man called Captain Gordon thought that he had discovered the Golgotha where Jesus was crucified, and there was a tomb close by in a garden. So it's called the Garden Tomb, and close by, just on the other side, you can see it from the garden, is this skull-shaped knoll or mountain or hill, which Gordon believed in 1883 was where Jesus was crucified. It's outside of Jerusalem today. It's outside the Damascus Gate, north of the Damascus Gate. In terms of ambience, it's quieter, but at the bottom of that skull that you're seeing is a bus station. There are buses that are circulating around on tarmac. And above that, if I remember correctly, there's the Muslims have put a cemetery on top of that hill. So that's one place, Gordon of Khartoum. Yeah, if you know, go study, Google Gordon, Captain Gordon, and you'll find out he died in the Sudan, part of the British expansion of the empire. But he lost his life eventually there. If my memory serves me correct, do you sing it as well with my soul here? Okay, isn't that Spafford? Who wrote that? Horatio Spafford? Horatio Spafford was a good friend of Captain Gordon. He's got a house in Jerusalem. And you can see from that place, Skull Hill, where we sat on the benches, you can look towards Spafford's house. And apparently Gordon and Spafford had some time together. Spafford was the lawyer from Chicago, if I remember correctly. Let's go to the second place. That's the heart place, but I don't think it's the right place. I think this is where Jesus was crucified. You can't see it. You got to go inside, and there's a little hill up there that's protected inside, and this is called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Why do I think it's this place? Because although this is in the city walls today, in the first century, it was outside the city walls. It was a quarry, and most of the early church community would celebrate Easter and would come to this place from about the death of Jesus, I would put it 80-30, until about 65, when the Jewish war begins in 66 to 70, then the Jews are going to be driven out of Jerusalem. And then one of the emperors, Hadrian, was going to build a temple to Aphrodite on top of this place until in the Council of Nicaea in 325, one of the bishops commissioned or requested of Constantine that he take that pagan temple away of Aphrodite and dig down and find the original place again. And they built this church, and it was rebuilt through the years and centuries. So this is the place where most scholars today would argue this is the place. It was outside the city. It was a quarry, and it was shaped with corridors. Maybe it's shaped a little bit like a mountain, a skull, and that's where Jesus was crucified. So you got two places that are vying for attention. There's a lot of noise in that place. There's a lot of people shoulder to shoulder. It's hard to get the ambience there. It's not hard there at the first slide that you saw in the garden. But I think that's the correct place. Let me talk a little bit more about Golgotha. Why was it called Golgotha, skull? There are a couple of hypotheses. One is that some argue, I don't think this is correct, that Adam was buried on this hill. Adam's skull is in this place. I think that's a long reach. Much more likely is what Jerome says. Jerome translated the Bible, the Hebrew scriptures and the Greek text into Latin. It was the Bible for 1,000 years. The Catholics used it. The Vulgate, the Latin Vulgate. Jerome was one who argues, and I think he's much more in line here, it was called Golgotha because you found bones at the top of this hill, unburied bones, and maybe a few skulls. So it was called the place of the skull. I'm a little nervous about that, but I think I prefer Jerome's option, the second option, to the first one, Adam's skull being buried there. I think he's getting warm. Do you play that game? You're getting warm? I think he's getting closer. I'm concerned, though, that the Jews or the people would not bury the bones outside that city there. There was such an anathema towards death that I don't think they'd allow bones just lying around outside the city. Maybe they would. The third view that I think is probably the better view, and I wish I could remember it right now. I'm trying to reach back into the mystery of my mind here. I just read this. The third view is, let me see. Just gone blank on what that third option would be. Now I'm concerned. I've had 3 lectures today, but I should be able to remember this. Let me continue, and I'll come back at it. Hopefully I'll recycle, and the synapses will connect back again, and I'll be able to put it out there. But there's a third view that is much more attractive to me. And if I don't think of it, I'm going to have to email it to you tonight when I get home so you can tell everybody. All right? So that's a little bit about Golgotha, Skull Hill. Let's get into the text. I want to ask a question. And this sounds simple, but it's quite profound. It's one that Joel Green posits when he writes an article on crucifixion. Why did Jesus end up on a Roman cross as the King of the Jews? Why did Jesus end up on a Roman cross as the King of the Jews? The why question. It's a good liberal arts university question. Why? Why? I think if you begin to think there's obviously an answer. God is involved in orchestrating this dimension of salvation history. But I want to add 2 ancillary questions to that. To answer the why question is, how did Jesus die? And where did Jesus die? If you ask the how question and the where question, it'll begin to shed some light on the why question. How did Jesus die? Well, he died by crucifixion. That tells me so much how Rome perceived Jesus, this Galilean. How did Rome perceive Jesus? Well, he was, in Roman eyes, who did they put on a cross? Not their citizens. If you're a Roman citizen like Paul, you get beheaded, quick death. If you're a slave or you're seditious or treasonous or suspect in Roman political eyes, you end up on a cross. So I'm going to argue that they perceived Jesus, and I'm putting my card on the table quickly now. The Romans perceived Jesus as a seditious rebel. Where was Jesus crucified? Second question, to answer the why question. He was crucified outside the city. The Jews did not want to pollute their city. Read Hebrews 13:13. He was crucified outside the camp, outside the walls of Jerusalem. This holy one, this perfect one. With irony, the Jews said, we'd take him outside the city lest he pollute the city. That tells me something about how the Jews perceived Jesus, the religious establishment, the elites, the seminary professors of that day. They perceived Jesus not as the Romans, as a seditious rebel, but as a subversive prophet. So I want 2 phrases to ring. Seditious rebel, Roman perception. Jewish perception, subversive prophet. Now, let's go into the 3 parts that I want to talk about this evening. I want to talk about the certainty of Jesus' death, the manner of Jesus' death, and the meaning of Jesus' death. First, the certainty of Jesus' death. If I cannot establish without any doubt, incontrovertible evidence is what we call it in law. Incontrovertible evidence. If I cannot give you tonight incontrovertible evidence that Jesus died, forget the resurrection. The resurrection only becomes a reality if I can establish the death of Jesus first. So I want to go to 2 sources. I want to go to what we call inner evidence, internal evidence, and then I want to go to external evidence. The internal evidence is going to the New Testament. Documents written by faith, but when you read the Gospels, which are a kind of literature, they have a specific trait or feature. What's that feature? It's the passion narrative. Every gospel is a passion narrative. A German theologian, Martin Kahler, said that the Gospels are passion narratives with a long introduction. In other words, they're about the cross in essence. The trial, the suffering, the patior, the passion of Jesus. So our 4 Gospels come home clearly about Jesus' death on the cross. We read Acts, the speeches of Acts. Go read Peter's speeches, Stephen's speech. Look at Paul's speeches. They mention the cross. Go read Paul's letters. There's snippets about the cross. Look at the Apocalypse, Revelation. It references Jesus' death on the cross, the Lamb slain. That's internal evidence. That's easy. I want to go to non-Christian material, external evidence, to prove Jesus' death is a historical, incontrovertible fact. If I've got non-believers saying this figure, Jesus died on the cross, that gives me more ballast and weight to put with my internal evidence. So I want to bring forward I want to summon forward to the table. Okay? First one, Josephus. Josephus lived from about 37, 38 AD to 100. He was a Jewish historian who was in the lap of luxury after the Jewish war. He changed sides and he wrote Jewish histories. He tried to get on the pig's back, so to speak, with Rome. He was patronized by Rome. And so Josephus comes along, and I'm quoting Josephus. He says, Jesus was a doer of startling deeds who drew a large following of Jews and Gentiles, and he was executed by and I'm quoting him, our leaders. The Jewish elites executed Jesus. Josephus refers to his crucifixion. Unfortunately, he doesn't give us a clue as to why he perceived the Jews had Jesus executed. He doesn't give us the reason. He just tells us the fact. So Josephus is Exhibit A. Exhibit B is Tacitus. Let's go to a Roman historian. Let's go and have a look at Tacitus, and we'll find the 2nd century historian, 56 AD to 120 are his life and death, birth and death. Tacitus writes in his Annals that Christians were named after one called Christ, who during the reign of Tiberius, Tiberius's reign was AD 14 to 37, during the reign of Tiberius was put to death, executed by Pontius Pilate. It's two secular sources that reference Jesus' death. The third one is Lucian of Samosata, roughly around 120 to 200. Lucian of Samosata, AD. He was a Greek rhetorician. He walked around the sofa. He said, and I'm just going to give you the quote, Jesus was a crucified sophist. What was a sophist? A sophist was an itinerant teacher, a philosopher, who wandered around giving lectures from place to place, and he taught people rhetoric, how to argue, strategies of debate and persuasion. He says Jesus, here's a secular man, a Greek rhetorician. Lucian said Jesus was a crucified sophist. Last one, this is a Christian, Justin Martyr. Justin Martyr, 100 to 165 AD, there's his boundaries. He says, they call it madness, that we put a crucified man beside the unchanging and eternal God, the God of creation. He said that again. Justin Martyr says that the secular people out there say that we are mad because we place a crucified man, i.e. Jesus, next to the unchangeable, eternal God who is the creator of the world. So I've summoned Justin Martyr is a bit of a fudge because he's got some skin in the game. He's a Christian father. But the other three, a Roman historian, Tacitus, a Jewish historian, Josephus, and Lucian, a Greek rhetorician, I've got internal, external evidence that brings me home with the certainty of Jesus' death. Well, let's talk about the second point, manner of death. What I find in the Gospels when I read the crucifixion is a lack of sensationalism. National Enquirer doesn't get involved here. There's no People magazine. It's not written up with gory details. What you find is, and he was crucified. It doesn't get into the physical drama very much. And I don't want to make you uncomfortable tonight, but I think we need to understand some of what's involved with this crucifixion event. And so what I want to do, first of all, is to just put in play the Latin word for cross is crux, C-R-U-X. It's a 4-letter word. It's an obscenity in Roman conversation. You don't use that in polite conversation, the word crux. Cicero makes the remark, let the very name of the cross be far away from a Roman citizen and even far away from his thoughts, his eyes, and his ears. Crucifixion was anathema to the Romans. It was the ultimate shame in an honor-shame culture and disgrace. Where did crucifixion begin? In terms of a history of crucifixion, it began with the Persians. Alexander the Great, who came to, it was 23, so was born in 356, 336, he brought with him, until his death in 323, he brought crucifixion with him as he conquered his empire and headed east. The Romans took crucifixion and they perfected it. What's the goal? To protract the agony, the torture, for as long as you can without killing the victim. Did the Jews practice crucifixion? They did. There was a bad Jew called Alexander Jannaeus. He was part of the Hasmonean dynasty, and his time frame was 103 BC to 76 BC. And he heard that one of the Pharisees, who he was always fighting, headbutting, one of the Pharisees had cast a slur on his mother and made some derogatory statement about his mother. And while he was carousing with his concubines, he sent word for them to go and gather 800 Pharisees, and he had 800 Pharisees crucified as a consequence of that remark made by a Pharisee. So that's the one account that we have of Jews perpetrating this diabolical evil, crucifixion. When the Romans came into town in AD 66, Titus was there with his father Vespasian. Vespasian left him and went to acclaim himself as emperor in Rome. During Titus's day, they were putting on the cross 500 Jews a day. The stench in Jerusalem, you can imagine. They were running out of wood. That's why they were plundering the western flank of the Mount of Olives there, finding wood to put Jews on crosses. So this crucifixion event is full of sordidness. In terms of capital punishment today, that's another issue that I don't have time to address today. But what I do think about what we do today in terms of capital punishment is so, I don't really even want to make that remark, but compared to what crucifixion is in that day, it was horrific. The victim was half dead before he came to the cross. He was flagellated as Jesus was. He would carry the patibulum, which was the cross beam, and Jesus stumbles. Simon of Cyrene helps him get there. He is half dead by the time you placed on the cross. You could be affixed to the cross with your hands, and you could be tied to the cross with rope, or it could be a spike through the metacarpals, not through the hand. The hand cannot sustain the weight of the victim, so it would be through the wrist bones, the metacarpals. Was Jesus' hands hung to the cross, or were they spiked to the cross? Huh? How do you know? You're right. How do you know? That's what I tell my students. Prove it. Because in John 20, Thomas is summoned by Jesus. Come see the scars. If you had a rope burn, that wouldn't be. Come put your hand in my side and my scars. So Jesus was spiked. In 1968 in Israel, in northern Jerusalem, they found an ossuary, a bone box. And inside that bone box, which is just going to have the femur, the flesh is gone, so you got the bones like this in an ossuary. It's not a big box. They found ankles that were spiked together, and it was a crucifixion victim. And it shows us that on the cross, they put a spike through both ankles. They had what was called a sidile, S-I-D-I-L-E. That was for your behind, your buttocks. And you could sit on it and kind of rest. It was called sitting on the cross, on the sidile. Now, in order to breathe, you got to push down, and they had a footrest, they had a behind rest, and a sedile, but they also had a footrest called the suppedaneum. And the suppedaneum was where you would push up to get breath into your lungs. And it was called, as I said, sitting on the cross with the sedile and the suppedaneum. The trauma was like taking a sponge and squeezing out drop by drop, distilling the lifeblood of the victim, drop by drop. Horrific. The crucified victim was often the source of flies and insects all around your face and your back, the blood and the gore. You were also grim pickings for birds of prey and dogs. Dogs would get up on their hind legs and start tearing away at the victim on the cross while he was alive. You were naked on the cross. Ultimate shame. Naked on the cross. And this wasn't some quiet private place where you were crucified. Romans wanted to shame you. So you were crucified where there were social arteries of intercourse and engagement, where the crowds were. So they could come and mock you and taunt you, and Rome could send their message, beware of Roman power. So I think that's enough of... there was one other practice that never happened with Jesus. It was called Crucifixion. In order to hasten the death of the victim, they would get a mallet and break the legs, the tibia and fibula of the victim to hasten death. That traumatic shock of broken bones would kill you pretty quickly. So it's not only a physical horror, crucifixion, but it's the shame, it's the disgrace as you hang there naked before the world and they taunt you and mock you, which we read in this text here. We have Jesus in Mark dying at 9 o'clock, crucified on the third hour, 9 o'clock. In John, it's at 12 o'clock, 6th hour, high noon. John moves the time. Why on the 6th hour? Because Jesus in John is the Passover lamb, and the Passover lambs were being slain at high noon. Have you ever noticed the signatures of solidarity that are behind this cross event? Nature. Nature, it's midnight at midday. The sun should be at its apex, its height, in terms of light, and there's darkness covering the earth. There's no solar eclipse. You can't have a solar eclipse for 3 hours. Solar eclipse is 8 minutes. And you don't have a solar eclipse when you have a full moon at Passover, which we've got in Passover season. So this is not a solar eclipse. This is not the Sirocco winds that have come from the east blowing in. They wouldn't be there for three hours. This is almost like God has suspended the laws of nature, and darkness, which is a symbol of God's judgment. If you read the Old Testament, God is writing his imprimatur across this transaction. This is my son being judged for the sin of the world. Nature speaks and preaches that day. But that's not the only signature. What happens when Jesus dies? The veil is torn from top to bottom. What is made redundant and obsolete in that one moment is the Levitical carousel of priests is retired. No longer are they needed. Put sacrifice away. We have Jesus as the ultimate sacrifice. He's paid the price. Retire the Levitical carousel of priests. So you've got nature speaking. You've got the veil torn, and then you've got Jesus speaking. 7 words from the cross. 7 sermons. Now, I got 50 minutes on each one of these. I can't do that. I'm going to give you 2 minutes each on each one. So let's take these 7 sermons from the cross, these 7 words, because this is what this is all about, this journey to the cross. The first word from the cross is found in Luke 23:34. It's a word of compelling forgiveness. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Look at those 7 words. It's very interesting. We have Father. 4th word, we have God, not Father. 7th word, last word, we have Father. So we got what we call an inclusio, a bracket, bookends, beginning and closing. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Now, this is getting a little technical, but when I compare textual evidence, the manuscripts, this is the only one of the 7 statements that is not found in all the manuscripts. So that alerts me to start thinking, what's going on here? Is this word a scribal addition? Has a scribe added this in a margin and it's become part of the manuscript presentation down the road when we compare the manuscripts? That's a possibility. I'm quite comfortable saying there are enough good manuscripts for me to take this word from the cross. It sure sounds like Jesus, doesn't it? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So I give it credence, but I always alert my students that there's some textual ambiguity, and we need to look at this carefully when we come to this first word. The other 6 words are fine, but this one, we've got to be aware of the manuscript debate that's going on there. Who said those words? Stephen did, the first Christian martyr. If you go to Acts 7:60, chapter 7, verse 60, Stephen utters those same words after the lynching mob has dragged him outside the city, and at the Stephen's gate, that gate they have, stoned him to death. Father, forgive them. Who's the them? Let me get a pebble and drop it into still water, a pond. The ripples go out and out. Maybe the them is the Romans, the 4 Roman soldiers. That was a group of 4 that would hardened, calloused Roman soldiers would have put him on the cross. Forgive them. Move out. There's Roman complicity. Maybe it's Pilate and the soldiers. There's Roman Jewish duplicity. The Jewish religious elites have put him there. But don't stop there. Forgive them. We stand there. You stand there. I stand there. This death is for me. It's for you. My sin has put in there. We have all sinned the sin of Adam. We've replicated the violation of God's precepts. So we all stand culpable, to use the legal phrase again. This culpable, contributory contribution. I didn't want to use the word negligence. We've made this error deliberately, premeditated. We're all there. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Did God answer that prayer? Big question. Did God answer that prayer? There's a French commentator called Golgotha who argues if it's the Jews, Father, forgive the Jews for what they've done, then the Jews seem to have some respite for 40 years before the Jewish war broke out, and that was because they went to war with the Romans. And then they got hammered in that Jewish war. So I don't know, but I think the preaching word there is this compelling word of forgiveness. Father, forgive them, us. This is an act that is for us. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. Did they know what they were doing? They saw Jesus, Roman world, remember that phrase? Seditious, rebel, subversive prophet Jews. If you're Roman soldiers, do you fulfill the orders? I studied the Nuremberg trials in my second year of law school, international law. Are you responsible as a soldier for following through on the commands that your higher officer gives you? What's going to happen in Ukraine and Russia when that's ever sorted out in terms of war trials? Well, I'm going too far. Let's get out into the second word. The second word is found in Luke 2. If the first word is a word of compelling forgiveness, Luke 23:34, reverse the digits on the second word. It's Luke 23:43. This is a word of remarkable assurance. Remarkable assurance. 2 bandits are his court. This is a king, and he's got some courtiers. The Romans are parodying him, mocking him. They've already given him a purple robe before they stripped it off and crucified him. They gave him a scepter, which was a cane. They gave him a crown with thorns. But he's got on either side, not kleptomaniacs. These are not thieves. That's not the right word. That's kleptai. These are not thieves. These are guerrillas. These are bandits. The Greek word is leistai. These are guerrillas, Barabbas kind of fellows, freedom fighters, ruthless thugs who will assassinate Romans and Jews who are in league with the Romans without even blinking. Jesus has 2 of these bandits on either side of him, guerrillas, leistai. And initially in Luke, I didn't read Luke's account, but in Luke's account, both of them are mocking and taunting Jesus, but one of them changes his mind after he's observing Jesus' response through these hours. Luke brings out the innocence of Jesus. Herod finds him innocent. Pilate finds him innocent, and a bandit changes his mind and finds him innocent. The bandit says to Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. It's verse 42. Remember me when you come into your kingdom. That word remember in the Greek is manao, which means to remember, not just cognitively, but when you see me, do something for me. When we celebrate the Lord's Supper, remember, do this in remembrance of him, the cross. We're intersecting the present moment of our lives back to that past event, the cross. And we're doing something. This bandit is saying, Jesus, when you come into your kingdom after this event, when you see me out there Don't just acknowledge me, but do something for me. When you come into your kingdom, in the future, what does Jesus respond? Today. He does much more than the bandit anticipated. Today, this day, you will be with me in paradise. Deathbed conversion, 11th hour on the cross. Jesus dies early on the cross. The first one across the threshold, in a sense, is the bandit. With me in paradise. I wish I had time. I don't have time to talk to you. Where does Jesus go when he dies? On the cross. Some people want to argue about the harrowing of hell. He's down there in the precincts and corridors of hell preaching the gospel, etc. They go to 1 Peter 3 and they jump around there and come up with that kind of interpretation. This word says, today you will be with me in paradise. Paradise is a Persian word. It means a secluded place. It's a garden place, a place of serenity and tranquility, which becomes a symbol for being in the presence of God. Today, this day, bandit, you will be with me in paradise. Third word from the cross. And I'm going to need to pick up my papers here because you need to, actually I've got them, the others fell, so that's all right. A word of compassionate provision, a word of compelling forgiveness, a word of remarkable assurance, a word of compassionate provision. I was thinking a little bit about this a night or two back, and I never thought of this before. But when Jesus is hanging on the cross and he looks down, he sees his mother Mary, and he says, "Woman, behold your son," not Jesus. When he says, "Woman, behold your son," he looks across and there's the beloved disciple. Son, beloved, no, he says beloved to the beloved one, the beloved disciple. Here's your mother, looks to Mary. What he's doing is he's placing Mary into the protective custody of the beloved disciple, who I think was John. Now, I want to just tack on why he's doing this here. I want to go down into a little legitimate corridor for a moment, a legitimate rabbit chase. Joseph has passed from the scene here. Jesus is the eldest son. The three positions, have you looked at Mark chapter 6, verse 3? It talks about Jesus having siblings, 4 brothers, and it talks about sisters in that verse, Mark 6, 3. Where do these brothers and sisters travel from and come from? There are 3 views. The Helvetian position in the 4th century is that these were born after Jesus was born to Mary and Joseph. Joseph and Mary consummated their marriage after Jesus had been miraculously birthed. Mary was still a virgin. And those were brothers and sisters that came down the trail. The Epiphanius position in the 4th century is no, Joseph was a widower. Joseph had been previously married and his wife had died, and Joseph had now come and he'd taken this little adolescent Jewish peasant girl from Nazareth and married her, and he brought to the table some children from his first marriage. So these were kind of, what would you say in this world, stepbrothers and sisters? A third view is the Catholic view, which wants to protect the perpetual virginity of Mary. And so what are they going to say? Brothers and sisters? Cousins. That's a big reach. It's a big reach in the Greek text to call these cousins. But I did that so that you could see that this is why Jesus, as eldest son, is placing Mary into this protective custody. But the thought that I had, which I hadn't had before, was, do you remember one of the most poignant moments in Jesus' birth was when Mary and Joseph are coming up the temple steps and they are intercepted by this divine GPS, God's sovereignty. There are many couples coming up the steps of the Jerusalem temple, but Simeon goes to Mary and Joseph. He's waited all his life, and he holds this little baby boy called Jesus in those trembling, frail arms. He's waited all his life for this moment of climax and denouement. And I can imagine tears streaming down those weathered cheeks as he holds this little Messiah in his arms. Go read that in Luke 2 tonight. And he talks about how there's going to be tragedy and suffering in the life of this little one. There will be a spear that will pierce Mary's heart. I'm wondering if she stood, as she stood at the cross, if she went back 30 years earlier and thought back about Simeon's words. Here it was. This was her son, this one who is dying on the cross. Fourth word from the cross, Mark 15:34. Let me check that. Mark 15:34. Yeah, a word of absolute desolation. Now, I want to get into this a little bit more. How much time have I got, Scott? 10 minutes?
Actually, 5.
I got 5 minutes. Okay, all right. Well, a word of absolute desolation. My God, why have you forsaken me? This is not a charade. Jesus is absolutely bereft, orphaned. This is what Gethsemane was about. The lament in Gethsemane is now demonstrated in this cry from the cross. This is God abandoned by God on the cross. The Father's checked out, not because he doesn't feel anything. There are two broken hearts at that cross event. It's the Father's heart. Abraham Heschel, a Jewish rabbi, said if you could see the heart of God, there'd be a tear coming down his cheek, if you could see his face. His heart is broken and the Son's heart is broken. He doesn't call Father, Father, where are you? He says, my God, and the word that he uses for God is Eloi, Elah. It's the God who we refer to in the Hebrew as the God who judges. God is judging this transaction of the world. The sin of the world has been heaved up in one movement onto the shoulders of the Son, and he hangs on that cross, and he cries out, God's not there, he's not present, because this is what was planned in the courtyards of heaven, the divine conspiracy. Jesus had come to rescue us. He was dealing with the sin issue. My God, why have you abandoned me? He's bereft, he's desolate. This is a cry of dereliction. Now, some want to make light of this and go to Psalm 22 and argue that's a messianic psalm. The opening words of that psalm are, my God, why have you forsaken me? I think that's too easy a response. I don't think that Jesus, if you read all the way through that psalm, the psalmist comes round to a point of belief in God again. I think Jesus gets there in the 7th word, in the 6th word, but he's not there at the 4th word. This, my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus is absolutely marooned on his own. This is reality. This is how much it cost him. Okay, now let's press it theologically even more. What does this do to the Trinity? This is the first time that there has not been communion and fellowship of Father and Son and Spirit together. Can I go as far as saying for these few moments, hours on the cross, there's a disruption in the Trinity? This is a new frontier that the Father has to cross and the Son has to cross. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? I can't stop and tarry. I got to move. There's 3 more words from the cross. 5th one, I'm thirsty. A word that I've got down here is a word of physical deprivation. John 19:28, a word of physical deprivation. This is the only clue to Jesus' suffering, physical suffering on the cross that we're given by the evangelists, the gospel writers. I'm thirsty. And to me, it is just tinged with laced. John is full of irony. This is irony. Why is it irony? Because go back to John chapter 4. Jesus sits with the Samaritan woman, and he says, if you had the water that I offer you, living water, you'd never come to this well again. He says, I can give you living water. The one who promised living water is himself thirsty. There's irony there. The 6th word from the cross is a word of ultimate victory. Tetelestai, it is finished. It is finished. And there's so much here. It is finished. Well, the religious priests went home after being out at the cross where Jesus is at Golgotha. No doubt they were rubbing their hands, gloating. It is finished. We finally got him. And we finally got this Johnny-come-lately out of Nazareth. He's given us so much uphill for 3 years. We got him on a cross. It's done. He's gone. He's dead. What about the Romans? The Romans thought, well, there's another Jewish messianic pretender. We've taken care of him. What about the disciples? Well, they've dispersed. They've run off. They got the seminary degree, but they really didn't get it. Their teacher is gone. But Jesus says it is finished. The Missio Dei, the mission of God, reach back from this word, the sixth word, the word of ultimate victory. Mark tells us he died with what? Do you remember reading it? A loud cry. Mark's loud cry begs for content. What did Jesus say in his last loud cry? It is finished, tetelestai. And I wonder if those Roman soldiers had heard that a similar cry of victory. Maybe some of these soldiers had been out on the perimeters expanding the Roman Empire, and when they got victory, they heard the cry of victory, and they signal this and recognize this when Jesus cries out, tetelestai. It is finished, it is complete, mission accomplished. Mission not aborted in the Garden of the Olive Press, but lived out, demonstrated on Skull Hill. The centurion, truly, this man must be the Son of God. One of the climaxes in Mark's gospel. Well, the last word is found in, let me give you the text, Luke 23:46. And this is a word of ruthless trust. Luke 23:46, a word of ruthless trust. You know the prayer. You learned it. I learned it. Now lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. That's a childhood prayer. Jesus dies with a childhood prayer on his lips. We're back to Father. Father, into your hands I deposit my spirit. Father, we're back in touch with the presence of God at the end, shortly before he dies. Father, that's a word of dependence. Father, my Father, into your hands. It's a word of dependence, Father. It's a word of deposit into your hands. It's a commercial banking term. I'm depositing my life principle, my spirit, into your hands, safe hands. Think about hands in those moments on the cross. His own hands were fixed, immovable on the horizontal beam. He'd seen what the hands of men had done in those 12 hours. They had beaten him, flogged him, cuffed him, put a crown harshly on his head, smacked him around, buffeted him, used fists on him. He'd seen the wicked hands of men in operation. Now he says, Father, into your hands, safe hands, I deposit my spirit. What does that mean? It means that in 3 days, because his spirit, his life principle is in the hands of God, there'll be a resurrection. It means in 40 days, there will be an ascension. It means in 50 days, there will be Pentecost. Safe hands. Father, into your hands, I deposit my spirit, my life principle. That's a word of dismissal, a word of dependence, a word of deposit, a word of dismissal. I am giving you my life principle. And he bows his head. He lives with poise and he dies with poise. This was a childhood prayer that the Jew would pray. Into your hands I commit my spirit before he or she drifted into sleep at night. So let me finish. There was a Quaker called Rufus Jones who tells the story of his childhood. And when he was growing up, his parents one Sunday afternoon said to him, Rufus, to him, we want you to weed the turnip patch. His buddies come along when his parents had checked out and said, let's go fishing. You know what little boys will do? Man, on a Sunday, I'd rather go fishing than weed a turnip patch any day of the week. So he said, well, I've got to weed the patch. The boy said, we'll come back early and we'll help you do what you need to do. You know, any fisherman worth his weight in gold, he's going to stay there till the sun sets. That's what they did. As Rufus makes his way back home, he sees his mother standing in the doorway with the light behind her. He knew what's coming. She's got a swish. She takes him into a little room, and she sits him in a chair, kneels down in front of him, puts her hands on his knees and looks up in his eyes and tells God all about this little boy of hers, her dreams for his life, God's dream for his life. And then Rufus says, a miracle happened. She kissed me on the cheek and left me in the silence with God. Kissed me on the cheek and left me in the silence with my thoughts and with God. If you ever doubt the love of God. He hasn't coerced us with thunderbolts, lightning bolts, power. He's come to us and he said, come stand at the foot of the cross. If you ever doubt the love of God, go stand at the foot of the cross and look up and hear Jesus say, I love you. I love you. That's the journey to the cross. Amen? God bless you.
Thanks, Dr. Crutchley. We have something for you, so come on up here again. Let's thank Dr. Crutchley for his presentations. Some folks who are listening in our church were listening to your first talk. Have a gift for you based on something that you said in that. So it'll be a surprise when you open it, perhaps. But we just want to thank you for you coming all the way down here and helping us get in touch with the love of God. So thanks again for
Thank you
coming.
so much.
Yeah, God bless you.
Thank you all. Thank you for letting me come, be with you all. As I said, I've always enjoyed being with you all and with Methodists.
Thank you.
So thank you for hearing me.
So thanks again for coming. Thanks again for Yolanda and Deanne making the food. So get some